I was approached by people working on behalf of Moms Clean Air because they wanted to sponsor today's stream for us to cover a clean air conference. So I was really surprised by that because number one, I wasn't expecting people to get on their feet so quick after the election results, but I was also surprised by the topic basis because I would think of all the issues they'd want to throw at streamers, like, hey, this is what we want you to cover, this is the type of stuff and issues we think that's going to connect with the audience. I didn't think it would be clean air or clean water or these types of issues. I would imagine it'd be like TikTok bans or the more, hey, let's find one of those youthful issues. But if there's any issue that is more important when it comes to public goods than the thing you need every second of every waking moment, please let me know. Because clean air is the most vital, most important natural public resource that we have. It's not something that you can import a new supply of from overseas. It's not something that, you know, you can just isolate yourselves from. It is a public good that we all have to rely on. And the externalities of companies polluting our air or polluting our bodies through microplastics, which is what was a big part of the conference today, was about specifically plastics getting into our bodies and how it's affecting our health, and the lack of research and exactly how it is detrimentally affecting our health. And I watched a decent amount of it off stream, and I wanted to watch one segment of it with you guys as well. But first, I wanted to go through a few of these clips. First off, I wanted to focus on this segment from Dr. Shannon Swan, where she's talking about how plastics have entered the human body. And there was a segment that's actually very, very interesting because she actually studies reproductive health. And she talked about how the environments you are in, whether it's an urban environment or an agricultural environment, and the amount you can be exposed to plastics and microplastics can affect your sperm count. And there's continuing developing research saying that these microplastics could affect your sperm count. Now, we don't have decisive research on this, but part of the reason we don't have decisive research in a lot of these areas, even though it's continuing to build and, you know, it's making me a little concerned for the little pieces of plastics in my sack, the part of the reason we don't have a lot of research for it is because they don't want research for it, is that there's so many companies, there's so many industries, there's so many manufacturing groups that use plastics, that dispose of those plastics cheaply because they're the best way to make money. It's the easiest way to make these goods. And if you just dispose of them and burn them in a big burn pit, that's low disposal costs. And ultimately, those companies' main motivations is making money. So those externalities of polluting our air when it comes to burning plastics, when it comes to getting plastics to get in our bloodstream, to get in our bodies. The people talk about, you know, a whole spoon being in your body. Why? I don't want a spoon in my body. I don't want really any microplastics in my body. Now, if it's not affecting me, then I don't know how much I can really care. But if I'm reading reports that could indicate that it could affect my sperm count, that it could affect other health, we've seen some research talking about a pregnancy and how it can affect female pregnancy. A lot of this conference was really awakening for me because I thought microplastics was mostly just, and complaining about it was mostly just hippie bullshit, right? Where I want to talk about union power and you want to, you know, just talk about the plastic straws. And I'm not trying to, you know, I care about the environment, but I thought a lot of it was like a gimmick for clicks. But a lot of it is completely undiscovered science that we're still trying to figure out, while it's completely transforming our life in the 21st century because plastics dominates every part of it. So I wanted to show some clips from the conference and then watch some of the responses that the conference talked about of the plastic industry as solutions to the crisis of pollution. Let's start with the clip here where she talks about being addicted to plastics.
So the regulatory system is broken in a way that it fails to protect us. And we know that because we're still buying every day incredible numbers of these chemicals in our, you know, and putting them into our daily life. So if the system was working, we would not continually be exposed. The exposure in the population would go down. It is not. If anything, the opposite. So there's huge forces to continue the use of these chemicals. These plastics are very much in demand. In fact, we have, I would say, a plastic addiction. And this started, I think, at the end of the Second World War, when science was, glorified, and manufacturers of high-tech products could do no wrong. And so the regulation has been really inadequate, and some of our speakers will talk about that. I'm not on the regulatory side, but I know
the regulatory side looks at the science, right? And all.
By the way, when you listen to this, you listen to the themes that are being talked about here. These big companies, those who want to produce plastic, and I mean, like, do I need to sit here, and we'll listen to some testimony later, and explain to you why burning plastic in a giant fire pit when the air wafts over to local communities is bad for children playing on a playground? I don't really need to sit here and explain the science of it to you, because just like when you watch a plane crash, you don't need to be a pilot to say, yeah, that's not really how that works. I don't need to be a construction worker to see a house on fire. It's, no, that's not working. And when I think about these issues, about these companies choosing the cheapest way to manufacture their goods and then dispose of the waste, this is the type of stuff that you would think would be right up RFK's alley, right? This would be right. I mean, when you listen to him and his pharmaceutical company this, pharmaceutical company that, big pharma this, big pharma that, they're taking your kids, they're taking your wife, they're taking your house, they're taking your everything. You listen to him talk about how much financial interest wants you to be sick, and that there's a culture of sickness and profiting off of your sickness, and we need to promote a culture of health. So this area, you would think, would be right up his alley when it comes to rhetoric. How much time and effort during these first 100 days in his health revolution has been focused on dealing with microplastics? How much time during these first 100 days has RFK, and he's been sworn in for a bit now, has RFK focused on waste disposal and making sure that we, have clean air and we don't burn this waste next to low-income communities, because that's where these burn pits end up going. Low-income communities who already have a bunch of other negative environmental factors set against them. For example, like the lack of green space, which was a big issue for me when I was on my city's environmental board. But again, this should be right up their alley. But do you think that this administration has any belief, dedication to, or interest in putting in spanning regulations in order to stop the burning of these chemicals near low-income communities? No, because it's not their constituency. It's not their constituency. It's not their issue. And I don't think the con man who stiffs his workers is going to be that concerned when it comes to environmental health on the issue of disposal of waste, disposal of these goods. Point is, we're not getting no RFK revolution on microplastics, okay? What we're going to get is an RFK revolution when it comes to cutting those who deal with health issues, like the 10,000 that were just laid off at the National Institute of Health. And we're going to get somebody probably yapping way more than he should. We're going to get a top yapping health official where he's going to say a bunch of stuff, probably a decent amount of it not being true. And we're just going to hope and pray that he doesn't stick his fingers too much in the work of those under him who are more experienced civil servants and care about public health and not about the clicks on the podcast. Let's move on and talk about, when speaking about clicks on podcasts, though, those do matter. This woman did actually get on Joe Rogan, and this is why I do think that the opportunity to work with Mom's Clean Air Force and work with focusing on microplastics and focusing on clean air, this is something that's, again, bipartisan. This is, you cannot pitch clean air as like homosexual, or clean air is, it's woke and so trans now. It's clean air. It's clean water. I go to the people in West Virginia and I talk to, whether you're talking to like Democrats like Richard Ojeda or you're talking to somebody who's on the right, like clean water, clean air, clean water is a really pertinent issue over there for the miners, because there's been issues with West Virginian water being poisoned. These are winning issues. These were issues that will always win, because you will always need these things. Just like there's going to be certain markets that always will be stable. If you have bad, unclean water, you can't ignore that. You can't ignore the taste in your mouth. You can't ignore the smell. You can't ignore the rashes on your children. And so this is a bipartisan issue. And so if there's anywhere that whether you say it's the left or the environmental movement should be going on full offensive, as we hear it, some people say, oh, now's the time to wait and play dead, I think is on environmental issues. Especially since this presidency doesn't even believe in climate change. So expecting them to do anything on anything, or to stop them from doing anything that could be damaging, because that's the only anything they're going to do, is only going to happen with public pressure. And again, we should not be just like giving up for 4 years on an issue like climate change, or an issue like our children's health when it comes to microplastics, or unclean air, dirty air, filth air, because it's not something we really can wait on. Not to mention, if you don't work for the next 4 years, then once you have the opportunity to get legislators to act in 2026 or 2028, it's not like that just manifests out of nowhere. You need to work to build those movements.
Extremely concerned, as many people are, about microplastics and the tiny particles that we now know are in every organ in our body. I am concerned about these because they hit us in two ways. They hit us chemically because they carry the chemicals. They hit us physically because the physical particles themselves are invading our organs in the same way, I think, that asbestos did and silicone did, right? So that's an area of interest to me. I am very interested in understanding how to get everyone to hear this message, right? I have spoken in scientific conferences forever, scientific journals, you got it, hundreds and hundreds. But when I was talking to Joe Rogan, some people might not think that was a good idea, but anyway, I was on the Joe Rogan, and he was listening, and he said, do you mean that the toxics that we're putting into the environment are endangering the future of the human race? And I said, yes. And then he said, why don't people know about this?
Look, if there's ever been an argument for platforming or trying to get on these platforms and stuff like this, these are argumentations that you can't really lose on. If you are going on the Joe Rogan Experience, who's going to be the guy in there advocating on behalf of the plastics industry? And when you're still talking about these burn pits, it's an easy argument to win on. It's an easy thing to compel the American people to act on, not to make them do something, but to convince them that something should be done, or at least that, we should protect our clean air and our clean water and, these public resources we all need to survive. It's a question of putting the people in the place to make that argument. And I'm happy that she's going on Joe Rogan, even though some other might not be. I don't know how many of these clips we're going to watch, but I wanted to go through a few more before we went into the section on how the plastic industry is responding.
Is produced, and when it's burned, of course, we get the microplastics, but what is of great concern is also the particulate matter and the size of those particles. And we're very concerned with PM 2.5. And so plastic production and plastic incineration contributes to particulate matter of the size 2.5 microns or smaller. And that's the most dangerous form of particulate matter, in that it gets deep inside of our lungs and causes long-lasting effects all throughout our life. And so in addition to those VOCs and particulate matter, there are also other chemicals that can be released when plastic is burned, like what we refer to as persistent organic pollutants. And they persist in our environment, but also in our bodies, and cause, again, long-lasting effects. Some of those can include a very dangerous chemical called dioxin. It was a class of chemicals called dioxins. Furans, ethylene oxide. So a lot of these chemicals are endocrine disrupting. They're also known carcinogens, and they can have impacts on every stage of life, even before birth, again, all the way to the grave. So that's just a few of the pollutants that are produced, again, from the production all the way to the incineration of plastic.
Okay, so I don't know. Again, I don't want to go to too many clips because I'm just bombarding you guys, but I did pick out what I thought was some pretty good clips here. This, I thought, really communicated the importance of acting on this in advance, as being proactive instead of reactive to these types of health issues for youth, for elderly people, when it comes to microplastics, and dealing with this, doing the research, dealing with it before it becomes a bigger problem than trying to deal with the diseases after. Because it's one thing to say, there's a credit card in my body, there's a spoon in my body, whatever, dude. I got a little toy car in my body, cool. Okay, cool, whatever, you don't care. Sounds like a bunch of crystal TikTok, nonsense maybe. But if we don't do the proper research if we don't address the problem and we find out, oh, it does lower sperm count, oh, it does make cancer more likely, oh, it does increase the likelihood of complications when it comes to expecting mothers, oh, it does have these negative health effects. Well, then how many generations have we doomed to be affected by microplastics in these negative ways without doing the research, without doing the proper digging? And look, again, I'm trying not to get too into specifics because I don't want to claim scientific knowledge I do not have, but nobody is going to tell me that taking all these plastics and burning them in big burn pits and releasing that into the air is a safe way to deal with waste. Nobody's going to tell me that. And those are going to be in the communities that have the least health resources to deal with the effects of it. And so that's why we need to deal with it proactively. Not only because dealing with it after is more expensive, but the people who would have to deal with it most likely afterwards are those with the least resources to do it.
So once we shift our regulatory framework into impacts and exposures, we can talk about the cause of these cancers. I respect people who have looked for cures. I myself am a survivor of cancer. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But now it's time to focus on cause. Why is all this happening to us? And I want to thank Moms Clean Air Force for making a very dramatic point in forcing a pivot. Let's talk about what causes this. And it's much bigger and broader. Thanks for letting me talk about cumulative impacts.
Okay, so a few more clips. I want to throw this out here. Clean Air Act Section 129 regulates solid waste incineration, right? This is what exactly we've been talking about. This is the type of issue that there's no American in this country, you present this in front of them, hey, let's regulate solid waste incineration. When we take these giant burn pits and burn them and then have that air go over to the local school children's playground, we should say, no, let's target plastics incineration. Does anybody in this room think this is going to be moved on in the next 4 years? Do you guys think that there's any way that an administration that flipped its mind on TikTok after a single meeting with a lobbyist who just so happened to be a big owner couldn't be swayed by just 10 or 15 or $20 million from the plastics industry? Hell, we know that $5 million can get you a meeting with the president. You don't think the plastic industry can scavenge together $5 million? And that's why the only way you're going to get this administration and even other Democrat administrations to act enough on this or to stick their neck out for this type of legislation is going to be, or to at the very least not make the situation worse than it already is going to be informing the public, which is, again, why I was surprised why Clear Air Moms reach out to us and wanted to work with streamers on trying to get the word out. But we shouldn't have to do this. We shouldn't have to have this conversation. I shouldn't have to stream about this and say, oh yes, clean air. There's some things that have been around forever and you're kind of surprised in how someone hasn't figured out how to legislate it yet. For example, sex work. I remember being very young and asking somebody who was running for DC mayor as I was working as an intern for SEIU 1199. It's a healthcare workers union in DC. I was interning for them, trying to learn about union organizing. And I asked them straight up, they said, what question do you have? What's your stance on decriminalizing sex work? And there was nothing. And the more I looked around, I just realized how many politicians don't know how to confront that question, don't know how to deal with sex work, this underground economy, this issue. And people talk about it as the oldest profession in the world. And I was surprised by how much failure there was in legislating it. And so I know it's a weird comparison, but I think about it kind of like that, where we've had clean air, we've had since the beginning. Okay. I would say that, we've dealt with clean air before we figured out how to trade like coconuts for, any special activities. And we still haven't figured out a way to legislate it and protect it and punish companies for the external harm that they cause for low-income communities around them. And that's dangerous, because if they can make you bear the cost of their profit through the poisoning of your children, they will do that. I wanted to talk about a personal instance because I always appreciate personal testimony more than anything. So I wanted to talk about this pilot to build an advanced recycling plant and to burn plastics in the community of one of the presenters.
Oh, I grew up in New York City. I moved to California. I lived in really big cities. And when I became a mom, and after COVID, I was just over the city. And so we're like, we are going to move to the suburbs. And so we moved all the way across the country to this suburb, which is the #1 city to raise your kids, the best county in Maryland on some lists. So excited. My husband's like, I
just want to throw out there that this woman is smarter than most of the people watching, because she moved to Maryland. She chose to live with the most civilized of civilized people. And I say that from a completely unbiased position as a native-born Marylander.
build a house from scratch. We found this community. We built this house from scratch. We drove up the block to see the community, and we're like, wow, we're passing this company. It's called Grace. It looks like it's a church. Whoa, we are living next door to this church. We start asking around. We find out that it's the administrative buildings of this really huge company. Nobody quite knows what the company does, but it's the administrative buildings. We don't have to worry about it. So fast forward 2 years, and now our neighbors are finding out that it is a chemical company, and they usually do research and development, but right now they want to do this pilot, advanced recycling plant, and they want to burn plastics in our backyard. So about 2 weeks ago, I found out that I'm in a fence line community. I just heard that term for the first time. And that this happens pretty frequently. So we are on the front line of basically trying to help not just residents in our community, but the broader Columbia community understand what is happening. If you read any of the documentation from the company, you would think that we are a bunch of crazy people who don't know how to read, because the words that they're saying are not the words that we're reading. And so we are really having a battle of words. They're saying left, we're saying right, and it's confusing everyone. The residents are confused. It's just like in our local community who are also on the fence line. Some of them are like, what are you talking about? Why are you so hyped about this?
If people are told what's happening in their backyard when it comes to plastics disposal, I don't think most people are that excited for the GDP growth that comes with burning plastics. Okay? As much as that extra 0.5 percentage points might be able to help the local economy, if you can't live or have your kids live to enjoy that extra 0.5 percentage points, then none of it really matters, does it? Lastly, I wanted to show this clip from Summer Lee, which was the biggest person they actually got to come to the conference. Representative Summer Lee, the only elected representative from Congress that I know actually attended there. So you got to give her credit for, you know, giving them the attention this organization deserves, and giving attention to this issue that it, I think, roundly deserves right now. And again, this is an attack method on people who are in the pockets of the plastic industry that could only be successful. And when I say it can only be successful, I mean, how do you counter it? Let me think, just sit down, and I know the plastic industry can counter it, but I'm not talking about the plastics industry, okay? It's not Mr. Plastic. It's not Plastic Man that's sitting up there, and, you know, Mr. Stretch is going to be at the presidential debate in 2028, right? That's not happening. So we're talking about in the public arena of crusading for this. These industries are going to throw out bullet points to these people. They're going to throw out whatever they can, call them communists, call them whatever they want, trying to protect the community. But at the end of the day, there's a certain amount of basic logic and object permanence that you're going to be arguing against. Because when you're 3 years old, you kind of figure out, just when something leaves the room, it doesn't mean it disappears. You figure that out pretty young. So you see plastic get burnt in a company's backyard and it go into the air, and your kids are playing in the backyard. If you understand what object permanence is, you understand that the plastic didn't just fucking disappear. Excuse my my French. It had to go somewhere, and the place it went was your children's lungs. And so if anyone's an ally in fighting against children's lungs being poisoned by plastic, then they should get on the boat. It's a bipartisan issue, and I know bipartisan is a buzzword, but if there's ever been something bipartisan, it is this. When I talk to West Virginia and some of the most diehard Republican members of the family that I know, we also got some strong Democrats over there. There's some good Democratic history in West Virginia. It comes in unions and stuff people don't know about. But when I talk to the more conservative members there, when I talk about clean water issues, they're on board 100%. They're going to be on board when it comes to clean air issues as well. This is not cultural. This is about our basic health.
I am honored to announce that I intend to launch our new Environmental Justice Caucus in Congress to tackle these issues head on and to find solutions that work, but also to find solutions that are community rooted. Because we know that in the communities that have been harmed, we also know that there are solutions, because the people who are impacted every day have perspectives and have a voice and they have answers, and we need to make sure that we're being intentional about including them at every step of the way. And we can't allow more harm to our kids, to our communities, to our climate. Folks are suffering. Our planet is suffering, and we have to use every single tool available to us, even when it feels like we're up against a tidal wave in our bare hands. This caucus was intended to be launched in concert or in partnership with the late Representative Raul Grijalva. And I wanted to bring him into this space because we know that he has done such...
He passed away recently. He was pretty well respected in the labor community.
Impactful and important work. We talk about the intentionality behind going directly to impacted communities, indigenous communities, Black and brown communities, poor and working communities, to craft legislations directly with the people who were involved. This is what this caucus is about, to not just honor, to carry on that legacy, to make sure that we're using this as a vehicle to get, for instance, the Environmental Justice for All bill across the finish line finally, and to continue that work of not just Rep. Grijalva, but also Rep. Donald McKeeshan, who was another stalwart in the environmental justice policy movement, and to continue on that historic coalition building work that they did, that they led in creating that these, not just the Environmental Justice for All Act, but so many pieces of legislation that we are using, not just because we wanted to get passed, but also to organize, for you all to organize. So this caucus aims to carry on that work.
Look, I'm of the opinion that organizations like the Green Party have been ineffectual in building themselves up or really advancing environmental activism in the United States. I don't think Jill Stein's cult is going to advance us any further. If we want to make environmental issues part of the Democratic platform and make them think it's not a loser issue, it's going to be through building environmental caucuses and gaining institutional power within the party for those on the left and within the Democratic Party. This is the type of stuff you can do within the party. You care about labor, you start a labor caucus. You care about environmental issues, you start an environmental caucus. Because you can't have that type of impact if you're in the political hobbyist rooms 5 buildings over, okay? They're not having an impact on anything because they're not in the room where decisions are made. Okay, if we can get people in the environmental caucus, be in the room when decisions are made about what's on the DNC platform 2026, 2028, then we're getting somewhere. And there's no reason we shouldn't be crusading against burned plastic entering our children's lungs. You know, I understand that wasn't the big viewership getter, but every time we double down and hit one of these substantive issues, I always feel better after. I feel like I just had a soul cleansing.